He was a founding member of Australia's most loved group, the Little River Band. Together with vocalist Glenn Shorrock, guitarists B. Birtles, Rick Formosa, Roger McLaughlin and Derek Pellicci on drums, Graeham Goble was the band's primary songwriter. So many of his tunes reached the top 10. Graeham fills us in on how it all happened. Graeham Goble, great to chat with you. Everyone in the far-flung corners of the earth all know that Little River Band was one of the first Aussie bands to find widespread commercial success in the US. But that was no coincidence, was it? Because when you guys set out, that was always the plan.
Yeah, well, it was always my plan, even a long time before that. I mean, from about the age of 16, it was I pretty much set my course for that, even though I was just a burgeoning songwriter in Adelaide at 16. I started when I was 13 writing songs, but to me it was just a natural progression. I just thought that at some point I could write and be part of some international world-class thing, because the people that I always listened to or that I aspired to become were the best. Like in terms of songwriting and with musicians and singers and things like that. And so I just kept working until I felt I got to a level that I could compete with the best that there has ever been. So that was what the vision was. And so when it took a long time, and we had a lot of setbacks and a lot of problems, but when we eventually got to the States and started to really competing with people out there who were big at the time and getting great receptions. To me, it just felt like, well, that's what I always thought it would be anyway. So it didn't really surprise me that much. And I just going to say, I saw on your website you had something there on Average White Band.
Yes, I know you supported them.
That was our first gig.
I want to talk to you about that. But before we get to America, Graeham Goble, you say that you started writing songs as a 13-year-old. So where did you get the idea that you were good at this? How did that all begin for you?
Well, I never thought in those terms of it being good for me. I mean, I lived a very isolated life when I was a teenager, spent most of my time in my bedroom, and it was just an expression of the pain of youth, I guess. It's just I wasn't socially any good, really. I wasn't in any sort of social environment. I never went to parties, I never went out, I never did anything. And to me it sort of all started with me seeing a guy playing banjo on TV, because we got TV when I was 12. And I saw a guy playing banjo on TV, and my mum bought me a banjo, and I went and had some lessons, and I was learning the musical repertoire, but I didn't like it. I couldn't read music. I didn't want to learn music. But in that first week, when I had a stringed instrument in my hand, I was able to write about 7 songs, and that was the start. And so that was just my interest. It was just in that I was just obsessed with writing songs and original songs, and so that's what it was.
So your dream was to get better at songwriting, and you already had the vision in your head as a teenager that you wanted to join the best of the best and head to America. Is that right?
I knew that I would. I didn't want to. I just knew that this is what I'm going to do. And it's sort of like you might say, okay, well, some people I know, they know at 8 years of age they want to be a vet, or they want to do medicine, or they want to be a dancer or something. Well, I knew inside me that this was where my life was going to take me, and it wasn't a burden for me to do the work, because that's all I wanted to do. It's sort of like Tommy Emmanuel, like he played guitar every day of his life, and from about 2 years of age or something. I was the same in that I didn't want to do anything else. Like if a normal teenager would maybe want to go out with friends or those sorts of things, well, apart from my social anxiety, I didn't want to do that. I had no interest in that. I only wanted to work on my songwriting and write songs. That's all I wanted to do.
Well, you've certainly made a big success of it, haven't you? I guess just shows that hard work really pays off. Now, how did you come to join Little River Band? How did that come about?
Well, it's very well documented online, but I know that you want to go through it. Well, I formed Adelaide bands from about the age of 16. Firstly, a band called The Silence in Adelaide with some school friends, and then I formed a couple of Adelaide bands. One was called Travis Wellington Hedge, and then there was another one called. After that, some members of that and myself went on to form Alison Gross, which changed its name to Mississippi. B. Birtles and Derek Pellitri joined Mississippi in 1972, and then we toured around Australia for a few years and headed off to England in back half of '74, and that's where we ran out of money and sort of broke up and regrouped. But that's where we met Glenn Wheatley and Glenn Shorrock and laid plans to come back to Australia to really work to get from Australia to the American market. The first rehearsals and meetings for the River Band with Glenn Shorrock, which was still called Mississippi in those days, was in February of '75. Yeah, that was the plan, that we had this for Australia, a supergroup. We had, like, Beeb and Glenn and myself were reasonably well known. Glenn particularly well known with Axiom and Twilights, and Beeb in Zoot. So we were easy able to get a record deal, and so we just started work. And then after about our third or fourth show, we changed our name to Little River Band, and that's how it worked.
And you had to relocate to Melbourne, didn't you?
No, I was living in Melbourne.
You'd already come to Melbourne.
Yeah, I came to Melbourne in '72 when my band Mississippi, we had a song called Kings of the World, which was a we had Record of the Year album and single in 1972. And it was on the back of that I left my very secure day job at the Public Buildings Department in Adelaide and went to Melbourne to live in 1972, and then looked for and found Beeb and Derek to start to join Mississippi and start touring on the strength of the quite successful song of Kings of the World.
And then, of course, Glenn Wheatley came into the picture as your manager too, and he had his own rock pedigree, didn't he? He was the former bass player for the band called the Masters Apprentices.
Yeah, Masters Apprentices, yes. So that's why it was called, Australia's first supergroup, because there was four of us that had, quite strong histories. And so, yeah, it was and it was back in a time where there was just endless work. I mean, we were doing a gig every day, including Mondays and Sundays, and up to 10 gigs a week. We'd often play even universities lunchtime when the kids would come out for their lunch break. We'd be set up in the court and play, 20-minute set for them. So we played everywhere. To Saturdays, 3 gigs on a Saturday, and that's how we became so good. So when we went to America, like, we were so tight, and people just couldn't believe how good the band was live. We were good live.
Can you share with us, please, Graeham, how you got the name Little River Band?
We were looking for another name, and it was on about our fourth gig on the way down to Geelong, where the car that Glenn was in passed the exit sign to Little River, and he thought that would be a good name for the band. And so that night he announced, when we went on, he just said, "We are Little River Band," and that was just how it happened.
Everyone was happy with that.
Well, yeah, it wasn't. We didn't even discuss it, really. Like as usual in our band. I mean, Glenn just does what he wants to do, and he just basically renamed the band, and that was what happened.
So you play around Australia, you gain a huge following here, and then you make plans to head to the US. But you first went to Europe, didn't you, in '76?
At that time, like, we were signed obviously to EMI London because Wheatley signed us individually to, like, Japan and Europe and London and New Zealand, different things. So our first tour was supposed to be on the bill at the Queen Free Hyde Park concert, which was a massive thing, because we were going to play there and then the next day go to actually Germany for 3 weeks with the Hollies, and because that was our first overseas trip with the Hollies. So when that was basically West Germany. So when we got to London, our gear and everything had not arrived, and so we were unable to perform at the live in Hyde Park, Queen headed gig. And so we simply went straight over to West Germany and did, I don't know, around about 10 or so dates in West Germany with the Hollies. And they were sort of halls, just different halls in Europe. And so in Europe at that point, even in 76, the Hollies were quite a big draw. So that was our first time there. And then after that, in October of 76, we came back and did a few sort of club dates and a few places around, I think London, we played Manchester, and then off to America in October of 76 to our first show in the US where we supported Average White Band.
Little River Band was on its way to finding the kind of success that even Graeham Goble could never have imagined. The Little River Band's founder and primary songwriter Graeham Goble has been sharing what he thinks are the secrets to the band's success, namely hard work and being focused on the job at hand. As you're about to hear, despite all their successes, Graeham had no trouble at all keeping his feet firmly on the ground. You must have been beside yourselves with excitement, both heading overseas to play, but being on the bill with the Hollies and then supporting Average White Band.
We toured on It's a Long Way There, which got to 28 in America, and we were just getting supports everywhere. And in 77, when Help Us On Its Way came out in America, that's when we started to really be noticed and started to have some shows where we headlined. Glenn Wheatley wrote Help Us On Its Way. And then the next one was Happy Anniversary, which Beeb wrote with David Briggs. But I wrote It's a Long Way There, of course.
So you wrote It's a Long Way There. What were you talking about? What's a long way?
Well, the song It's a Long Way There, we were playing in Mississippi in 1973. So when I came to Melbourne, I was chronically homesick. And I used to drive back to Adelaide every 3 weeks to see my family and buy Adelaide food and have home cooked meals and all that sort of stuff. And so I had many, many hours on the road, and I started to get the seeds to It's a Long Way There in my head on those journeys. It's been an iconic song for us because it's pretty much was the song that we always opened with our whole career, even in Mississippi days. And it was probably initially about my understanding of that this is just the beginning of a very long journey in life, which encompasses the career. But it also talks about my spiritual beliefs in reincarnation and my understanding or my belief that even just this one life is just one in a continuing very long journey that we're all on. And so the long way there is the journey of either birth to death or from the beginning to the end, wherever both of those things are.
You mentioned Adelaide food that you were craving. What's Adelaide food?
Well, apart from my mother's cooking, there's a lot of things in Adelaide that doesn't exist anywhere else. I mean, there were yo-yo biscuits. They only make them in Adelaide. Big Sars, which they're not made anymore. That was an Adelaide drink. Golden North ice cream, best ice cream in the world, only exists in Adelaide. So there were just a number of things, and this was back in the day before supermarkets were so nationalised. Adelaide's probably the same as Melbourne and Sydney and everywhere now, but back in those times,
it had its unique bits and pieces. Amazing.
It did. Everything was just better. When I came over here, I had no cooking skills. I had no domestic skills at all. And so I was really like a fish out of water. It took me about 12 months to get over that move. It was very difficult. I would never have left had it not been the career pushing me to do that, because I knew that I had to leave Adelaide to pursue a music career.
Right. So by the time we get to 1978, you were becoming a major success in the US with the single Reminiscing that hit number 3. What was that like for you? I can only imagine how these local Aussie boys would feel to be lauded in America.
Well, it's because it was you see, Sandy, you've got to realise that, by the time, many years, all I did every day was music. Like, it wasn't like today where it's like a part-time job. When we were gigging every day, or rehearsing or writing songs, that was it. And so very little sleep, tired all the time. And so by the time we got to America, we're traveling 500k a day. We're doing a show every night. We've got little or no sleep. It's a job of work. And so you don't have time to sit and think like this is like incredible. And also, I was probably different than the other guys in the band, is that I didn't buy into the adoration and just standing there on stage and the applause and like that was very much something that Glenn obviously loved and Beeb enjoyed a lot. But touring and performing was something that I did at that time, but I don't miss it and couldn't have cared less really. It was wonderful that we got the reception that we did and that people loved the band. And I did very much enjoy the shows, particularly the singing and the performing. And I did enjoy, being the recipient of the applause and the that people gave us. But like it really, it's a bit, it's like going to Disneyland. It's a bit Fantasyland. It's not real. Like it's just, it's just what we did.
A lot of performers tell me that because life on the road is so busy that they almost misplace the entire period that they're out there doing it. And of course it is, as you said, you're in a permanent state of tiredness, and that has to take its toll on band members, doesn't it?
Well, it does on some, but with me, where I was just all about work. I didn't even smoke. I didn't drink. I never went back to a bar in my life. Never did any parties ever. So I've looked after myself really well. And so at my age now, at 75, I'm in great health, and I'm fine. Other members, not so much, and you can see how the lifestyle has affected a lot of people back in those era. They're not trading too well these days. And from my perspective, I just was not interested in the rock and roll party life. I wasn't interested. I just was only interested in the music, whereas everybody else in the band was interested in the party life.
I'm surprised to hear you say that, so that even as a reclusive teenager, that whole rock and roll life didn't bring you out and you didn't start enjoying socialising and...
No.
Really?
Never did.
Amazing.
Never did.
So I believe that what started happening to you guys, though, at that time was that, and tell me if this is a true statement, from the first album on, you, Glenn and Beeb always recorded separately?
No, it's not true. No, that's rubbish. It's all rubbish. We always travelled together on the same bus. We had a band bus and we had a crew bus. And we were always together like that. When we recorded the first two albums, we sort of self-produced our first two albums, and the conflict was mainly between Glenn Shorrock and probably me, being the leader of the band, in that we were so focused on getting things as good as they could be. Glenn didn't have the patience for that, and so we would often spend a lot of time working on band tracks and things like that before it got to the vocals. And then sometimes Glenn would be there, sometimes it wouldn't be there, because his main role is frontman, entertainer, and lead vocalist, whereas myself and particularly Beeb and other members, we were all about working out the instrumentation, and it takes a very long time to make the records that we were making. And Glenn just did not have the patience for that. We certainly sang all of our vocals together around three microphones, always. Mm-hmm. So some songs we would stack them, and we always travelled on the same planes together, same buses together. But the difference was that I wouldn't socialise. There just was no time anyway. At the end of the show, I got a choice of either going back to my room and trying to write a song, or getting a bit more sleep, or going to the bar. Well, to me, there's no contest. I want sleep.
How much were you writing in those days?
I would often come back off tour with 30 or 40 new songs, and the other guys would come back with virtually none because they didn't spend the time.
Huh. Of all the songs that you've written, Graeham Gobles, which would you say is your favourite?
I've got many favourites, but probably Please Don't Ask Me.
Why is that?
Well, because I think it's one of the great songs that's ever come onto the earth. It's just, a lot of people think it's just, it's like an American standard.
Do the songs just drop for you, or do you have to work on them to produce them?
No, they just drop.
They do just drop. It's a gift.
Well, they're sort of, I believe that I was like a channel for the gods to bring music through me into the planet. And so I think that back in the day, I would be receiving wonderful ideas and melodies and lyrics. And then I have to bring my songwriting skills to formulate that into songs. I became aware that a song would enter my being, and then I would be able to hear the lyric and melody coming through like you're hearing it on the radio. It was sort of, I often said that I felt like I had a radio playing songs in my head, songs that I'd never heard before. And so that was a constant thing in my life for about 30 years, I guess, or 40 years. It is amazing for people that don't experience it, but I don't think it's any different for a painter, or if you think even in your own life that you might say you've got an idea, that ideas come to us and it's up to us out of freedom to pick them up and go with them or not. Listen to your inner self and live your life that way. And that's what I've been doing and still doing my whole life.
Graeham Goble's philosophy on life certainly worked for the Little River Band, didn't it? The band scored more than a dozen top 10 hits and were rewarded with countless gold and platinum albums. The end of the 70s happened, we turned into the 80s, and by 1981, Glenn Shorrock is replaced by John Farnham. How did the choice of replacing Glenn with John Farnham come about?
Well, in a year before, I think it was in 80, because at that point, prior to joining the River Band, John was pretty much, he had no career. He was playing to about 5 people a night in the clubs in Sydney. And I approached his then manager, Danny Finlay. My idea just to produce a rock sort of album for him, because he was really in a brown suit and a bow tie or something and doing, Sadie the Cleaning Lady at Colleagues Club. But I always loved John's voice, like 10 years earlier. And so I approached him and then organised a meeting whereby John came out to my house with all these cassettes of songs that people had given him. Then I started playing some of my songs to him, and he picked about 8 or 9 of the 10 songs that we ended up recording for his album called Uncovered. And that was the first time that John sang in a rock style, and we had wonderful musicians, including Tommy Emmanuel, on the sessions. And then I suggested to John that he approached Glenn Wheatley for management. That experience was so wonderful with working with John, because he enabled me to write songs like Please Don't Ask Me, because he had the voice. A voice like Glenn Shorrock would not have been able to have sung those sorts of things. So I started to write for John. But in Little River Band, Glenn was withdrawing more and more because he was never a big communicator within the band. At that point, Wayne Nelson joined the band, and I wrote the Night Owls for Wayne Nelson's voice. When Farnham came along, he could sing anything that I could write. And so it got to the point where both Beav and I were disenchanted with Glenn's moodiness and crankiness and just being difficult to be with. And so he was basically asked to leave. Because at that point, I already knew that if Glenn was not there, we were recording the Net album at that point. If Glenn was not there, then Farnham would be the first and really only choice. Anyway, Glenn accepted, he left. And then on the first audition, we brought Farnham in, and I could not believe what an incredible harmony singer he was. He's the best harmony singer I've ever heard, let alone his lead voice. He's just a super musician. He is just incredible. And we had this dream band because he had a great attitude, because he was on his knees as an artist, like he needed a break. It was just a whole energy lifted, and this fresh energy came in. And John was in the band for 5 years. It was my favourite years in the band. It was just like dying and going to heaven musically for me.
Yet America didn't ever take to him.
Well, they didn't get a chance. You've got to realise the first single that we released went top 10. The Other Guy with John, that was top 10. We played 5 nights at the Universal Amphitheatre, all sold out. Fantastic reception everywhere we played. But what happened was the second single, a song called We Two, with Farnham out front, was the fastest moving single we had in America. It was 22 with a bullet in 5 weeks. In 2 more weeks, it would have been top 10. And that would have just cemented Farnham for sure. But then there was a major change at the record company, and the promotional guy left, and a new promotional guy came in, and he closed the checkbook on Little River Band, and in 2 weeks, We Two was off the charts, and that's what happened. We felt that Farnham could take us to where Fleetwood Mac and the Eagles were. That's what we really felt, and I think he could have, but it just wasn't meant to be.
So you must have been disappointed.
No, I don't get disappointed. I just think, well, that's that, and go on to the next thing. you know.
Wow, you're an amazing attitude, Graeham Goble.
Well, you've got to have in this business, mate.
Yeah, and tough skin, I guess, huh?
No, no, not tough skin. I get very emotional things, but I put it into my songwriting. If something goes wrong, I try and work out a way that where can we go from here. And so when LRB finished, that was in '86, we just closed the band down, and then I thought maybe I'll do some solo work. But then 2 years later, there was an offer to put Glenn Shorrock back in the band, and we recorded 2 albums, Monsoon and Get Lucky. And we brought everybody back in, except we didn't have Beeb, which was the major ingredient for our success. So we didn't have David Briggs either. So we just had, by that time, Steve Housden and Wayne Nelson, myself, Glenn Shorrock and Derek. So we did 2 albums, and they weren't successful either, because everybody thought, well, the reason it didn't happen in America was because Shorrock wasn't there. Well, we put Shorrock back there 2 years later, and it still didn't happen. So that was not the reason at all. Because, you see, we've had a top 10 in America with Glenn Shorrock, of course, singing things like Reminiscing a Lady. We had Farnham singing The Other Guy, and we had Wayne Nelson singing The Night Owls. So of all the top 10s we've had in America, have had 3 different lead singers. So it's clearly not just Shorrock's voice that makes a hit record for us.
So what is it?
It's the harmonies, it's the songs.
As time went on, though, there were further band splits, which eventually led to one Little River Band here in Australia and another Little River Band led by Wayne Nelson continuing on in the US, and never the two shall meet.
Well, in my heart and soul, they're not Little River Band, they're just a bunch of session musicians that have lucked onto owning the trademark. And it's been very difficult because they have legally prevented us from performing at all over the last 25 years. So they've taken our name and our history, deleted all of our bios. They've put their photos on the Spotify page, done everything to conceal the fact that there are no original members there. They use our music to advertise their shows. They use our images. They sign our greatest hits. And the unsuspecting public in America think they're seeing at least 1 or 2 members of the original band, which they're not. There's nothing we can do about it now. It's now too late. But they were very jealous and vindictive towards the original band, and they play, 4th-rate gigs and make quite a decent living out of it, I believe.
How were they able to get away with that?
Because they legally own the trademark.
Or how were they able to get the trademark in the first place?
Well, essentially, Glenn Wheatley was involved in transferring the trademark. Wheatley signed the name to another company for consideration to himself. The original members did not know that the name was lost until around about 10 or 12 years later. And so Housden lucked into owning this company and therefore finding out by default that he owned the name. And then he set about spending as much money as he could to prevent the originals from ever getting back together.
Yeah. Is that going to hold, or is there a period where that runs out and you will be able to get together again?
No, that's forever.
Forever?
Yeah, Housden will probably have his children owning the trademark and putting it out. It'll be like the Platters.
Wow.
There's nothing that we did. It just happened. That's just the way it was. What it resulted in was cutting off an avenue of income that said if we wanted to, we could have possibly put together a farewell tour, for instance, and done very well out of it. They're the sort of things that have made life difficult. But I've got on with my life and spent the last 11 years writing a musical. This is the thing that's going to blow all that out of the water, in that it's going to be a lot more lucrative than touring, and we're too old now to be touring. We just couldn't do that anymore, but we can make a wonderful film or a stage musical with all of the songs that I've got and tell this incredible story, unique in rock history, of how we've had our name and identity taken from us and been prevented from being able to perform as Little River Band. All of this is in this new show that I've written.
When can we expect that?
Well, as soon as I can get investors. It's the eternal problem in that investors line up to invest in American culture, but they don't want to support Australian culture. So I've not been able to attract an investor, Sandy. That's been the problem. But we've got a show that will absolutely kick everybody in the butt.
Graeham, you've also been extremely busy lately with the release of 2 hits collections, one called Ultimate Hits and the other called Masterpieces. How were you able to do those?
Well, the record company have the in perpetuity right to release all the historical work. It's just that new work we can't put out as Little River Band, but we can certainly remaster the back catalogue, which we've done. Masterpieces is my favourite Little River Band album ever. The Deep Cuts, the song Love Letters. The original was recorded by Ketty Lester in 1962.
Graeham Goble, it's been such a joy to chat with you. Wishing you continued success despite all the hiccups, but I love your attitude to life. I think we can all take something out of the way you think.
Thank you, Sandy. I enjoyed talking to you. Thank you.
Graeham Goble there from the Little River Band. If you're a fan, you may want to pick yourself up a copy of one or both of the latest albums. Ultimate Hits is just that, 20 of the biggest LRB hits, while the other album is a collection of deep cuts that you probably haven't heard before. Thanks so much for joining me today. It's been fabulous having your company. I look forward to being back with you again, same time next week. Bye now.